as an entrepreneur, Richard found his own company that is sold to Salesforce to build the Einstein product within Salesforce, and that's driving the AI initiatives within Salesforce greatly still today. But after leaving Salesforce, Richard founded U.com, which many of you know. There's a lot of publicity around it, super exciting. 300% growth in the last 3 months, each month, I think, right? Did I got that right? Super, super amazing. So I'm totally excited, I'm totally pumped to spend time with Richard. And maybe you can explain a little bit how you came about the idea of founding U.com and how this inspired this surge of technology that we see today.
Yeah, thanks so much for... You want to sit down? Sure.
Yeah, let's sit down.
Thanks so much for that nice introduction, and thanks everyone here. I feel kind of bad. I hope I'm not in between you and a very well-deserved dinner. I'm sure we'll get more food very soon. I started U.com for a bunch of different reasons. I think search is the most interesting AI and natural language processing problem in the world. I think NLP, partially through my research, but of course many other people's research as well, has gotten so much better in the last 10 years. Neural networks, word vectors, pre-training encoders, prompt engineering, having a single model that can solve a lot of different kinds of natural language processing has been pretty incredible to see, participate in, and witness. And so when you see the technology getting so much better, yet the biggest application of that technology, which is search, basically flatlining for the last 10 years or so, there's clearly an opportunity there just from first principles thinking to innovate and disrupt that monopoly. And then when you double click into that, you'll realize Google has a massive innovator's dilemma because they're making $500 million a day selling your data for privacy invading advertisement. And it's really hard for them to just change that list of blue links with 5 ads on top of it into a really useful chatbot. And so I think a combination of those things, the fun of intellectually sort of working on a really hard problem that can entertain you for a very long time, wanting to see the research I had done for so many years be actually usable by a lot of people, thinking also about privacy, and ultimately even democracy. Even like at a larger level, search engines can help us kind of understand viewpoints of other people that we might not agree with at all times and things like that. So just very excited about that.
Super interesting. What do you think is going to be the online marketing look like in the age of search via AI? So conversational search, if I may call it that way. What is the way of positively or negatively gaming the system to reach a state where I get more visitors, more publicity, sell more things, more authority in the view, in the eyes of an conversational agent?
Yeah, so if you rely on online marketing and SEO, I think the world will change quite significantly in the next couple of years. I think the times of SEO'd microsites to try to crawl your way up in Google ranking are mostly over. I think we've already seen a big trend of that. And to Google's kudos, we have seen certain trends that you now fully see fleshed out in chat even earlier. People also ask is essentially a follow-up query in some kind of conversation, and then short answer snippets already give you a little bit of an answer. They're just not as useful, right? You don't summarize websites, and they're just very, very low recall, high precision. And so long story short, as people click less and less on websites, you have to ideally write really good content to be part of the text and the content that the chat then writes about, which means you still need to have a website that gets crawled. But you can also, and I think in the future we're going to see sort of chats that are supported with ads, and some chat that is like ad-free, right? And if you have an LLM, a large language model, that is ad-supported, it may just start talking about Nike shoes when you're like, what's the best hiking or running shoe or something, because it got money for it. So I think there will be different online ads for chat that will come up.
Interesting. And then also, I would suspect that the journey of a user would probably not end in search, but it would actually be completed on the search engine, right? So I would presume that where publishers publish websites, but in a conversational journey, people would offer APIs that then are integrated into your conversation, where then also the transaction and the purchase happens. Does that make sense? Is that correct? Does that reconcile?
I absolutely love it. Yeah. So we actually built an app store. And the analogy I like to make is, imagine if the iPhone came out and it would only allow apps from Apple. It would probably still be better than some like flip phone or super old Nokia communicator or something like that. But it would not nearly be the kind of social phenomenon, cultural phenomenon that it is. Right? There would be no TikTok, no Instagram, no YouTube on the phone. That's essentially what Google has been able to get away with for search. Search could also be an app platform. And that's what we've launched last year in December, is basically the ability for any company to submit an app to that first search results page. And then indeed, instead of starting a funnel, you can try to get a subscriber right there on that first page. You can try to actually sell a physical product right on that page. And we just integrated payments too, so now you can actually pay for it. If you have like a generative AI app, we have, for instance, if you search on you.com how to generate an image with AI, it doesn't just tell you that's possible, here are a bunch of sites, but it also gives you Imagine, which is basically an app that lets you put in a prompt and then get a visual representation of that prompt out, generative AI for images too. And if you want to use that kind of app multiple times, you have to pay for a subscription. And that was basically one of our tests. And the answer is, surprisingly, people are willing to pay for a subscription app within a search engine.
Interesting, yeah. Cool. I guess many in the audience are faced with the challenge, positively or negatively, that they've been sitting at the sideline of a dust storm of AI products and tools, and everybody's talking about it. And since you're the CTO, you're supposed to have an opinion on that. And what is our AI strategy, and how can we leverage that? Are we doomed, or are we actually seeing a new opportunity? What would you recommend to look at the current dust storm? So there is probably a build versus buy question. How would you maybe on the highest level answer a question of, okay, what am I supposed to do now? How can I safeguard and ring fence my business in this dust storm, in this Cambrian explosion of stuff where a 3-man startup may be as productive as my 300 people engineering team? So how do you look at this? What would you recommend CTOs?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I knew more about the industries that everyone here is in, but it'll highly depend on your industry and the industry of your company. I think you have to, at a very high level, decide between two states. One, is your entire company going to be majorly disrupted with AI? Because let's say you work in transportation, or you work in generating proteins for drug discovery, or you work in service and automating, like selling per seat licenses to help people answer service questions, or you're a marketer or an illustrator. All of those jobs are going to be majorly disrupted. Like, you as an illustrator need to define your style through maybe 30 to 50 images, and the next 5 million images can be generated by an AI. And likewise, if you're a media company and your employees are writing very simple sort of summaries of other people's articles, an AI will be able to write those kinds of summarized articles. And so a lot of examples, happy to talk and double click into any industry. If folks have questions, I think we'll open up the audience questions soon. And then there's the second state, which is maybe AI is just going to make everyone more productive. And by virtue of using AI, you will just be more competitive compared to other companies. So you might not be in service yourself as a company, but you may have a service component. And you want to use AI automation for your service responses to be automatically answering emails and text messages and blog posts and things like that. If you have salespeople, you want to understand how they work, depending on the scale of your company, how they're who the best salespeople are, what are they doing, and then use those AI extracted insights and help educate the rest of your sales team. and so on. So there's basically lots of efficiencies. If you have a lot of developers, is English fully going to replace other programming languages? Probably not. But will developers get replaced by developers who use AI? Very likely, right? And so it is quite evident that developers who use massive large language models for AI code completion at least use U.com. We did some studies. When you search for how to write a website with HTML and some JavaScript for a commenting function, on U.com it'll just give a response of 200 lines of code. And you just copy and paste them with the copy and paste button right there, and you just saved yourself 5-10 minutes. And on average, developers spend 30 to 60 minutes looking up solutions and facts online and libraries and so on. If all of that comes immediately with a code snippet that you can just copy and paste and see if it works right away, your developers are going to be a lot more efficient. If you then pull some of those things deeply into the IDE, they're going to be even more efficient. So I think you want to look at all the efficiency gains you can have, and then of course don't forget that first bucket if you're in an industry that's going to get majorly disrupted.
How do you look at data security and maybe building a moat, as data is ultimately the differentiator if you train a model, and then you as a company can offer a better product that generates more users, more attraction, and then you can basically feed more data back into the model. So this flywheel accelerates, but at the same time there's also commoditization happening of the actual infrastructure around AI. Would you recommend? When would you recommend to host your own AI model with training and the whatnot and become a shenanigan of how to do the ML ops piece? Or where would you say, hey, wait for 3 months or maybe 3 weeks for the commoditization that's happening and just rent a AI model for doing the crap that you out to do? Or isn't it going to happen that every SaaS business, as a SaaS vendor that we're using today already will have, otherwise they're out of business, an AI strategy and implement it in their stuff? So how do you look at this commoditization in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is a lot of complexity, and it's a little bit related to that first, to your previous question, which is if that AI is a very core part of your business, you probably want to run it in-house, right? If you're a credit card company and you have a risk model, you better have your risk model in-house, right? You don't want that outsourced somewhere else, and you want to have a deep understanding of every last bit of accuracy on that risk model because it's directly affecting your revenue and everything. And then there are going to be a bunch of other ones where you may as well just rely on outside sources that already have teams of 12 people. I sometimes joke that currently there are so many SaaS companies that all they do is they look at something that 1 or 2 developers do in a lot of different companies, and then instead of having, and then if you're a developer in Silicon Valley, you make at least around $150,000 a year. So if you build a tool that 2 of the people would build, you're spending $300,000 a year to have them build that simple tool. And it's not complicated, right? There's some very simple things out there. But if you're now a SaaS provider and you say, well, we'll provide it to you for $20,000 a year, and we had 12 people work on it for 2 years, ours is better than the internal solution that you can produce, right? Then all of a sudden, you start using that SaaS product. And so, long story short, I think large language models, my hunch is right now, will get more and more commoditized. And at some point, we're going to think of them maybe like databases, where, yes, there is an Oracle. And if you want a massive, large, scalable thing that has to have hundreds of millions of concurrent transactions and so on, you'll use a large provider of large language models. But if you just want to have a little MySQL database thing, you're a startup, you want to hack up something, you want to quickly iterate, add some of your own training data, then you'd probably just download an open source one, Llama, Alpaca, and whatnot. There's a new one every week. And I'm very excited about those open source models. It also shows you that there's a lot of hype around, is the technology safe, or is it going to kill us all? Can we give it to other people? And now it's everywhere open source, and the world is still okay. And then maybe to answer another part of your question, I think build versus buy. And then I guess in general, for generative AI, one sort of model that I came up with a few weeks ago is that if you think about generative AI, basically generative AI being AI models that write code for you, that write text for you, that generate images for you, and so on, they're usually great when it takes a very long time to generate some kind of artifact, but it only takes you a few seconds to verify how good it is. So for instance, it might take you hours to draw something as an illustrator, but you can look at it and you're like, this looks like crap. I will never put that on a magazine cover or on my blog post or something. Likewise, as a front-end developer, it might take you an hour to hack up something, but if you had the code, you just like compile, look at it really quick, and you see, oh wow, this is what it would look like. This looks good or not. And so that's kind of a useful distinction for you to know whether a generative AI model will make sense for your business.
Excellent. Before we open the mic for the audience, the last question I have to ask as a nerd, what are you excited about technologically? So what keeps you awake at night when you think about the next wave that's going to disrupt this like ever larger getting wave that's already we are riding? Is it going to, what's the next multi-head self-attention sort of thing, right? So are the models getting smaller? Are they going to get bigger? What should we look out for? What do you actively research?
Yeah, so I do think models will get both smaller and on your phone, as well as get bigger, depending on the application. I think large language models, who here is familiar when I say large language model? Raise your hand. Awesome. All right, almost everyone. That's great. So large language models have this very simple idea, right, of to predict the next sequence item. And the reason I say sequence item is that it could be all kinds of things, right? It could be byte pair encodings and characters, and then people are like, oh my god, it's conscious, which it's not. It could be code snippets, but it can also be proteins. And so we published this paper a few years ago, and I'm very, very excited about this paper. Fortunately now, there are a lot of companies that have been started based on this paper. And the name of it is called ProGen, short for protein generation. And basically, it was us realizing, oh man, after GPT-3 came out, we can't really build even larger language models on natural language text than OpenAI, because unfortunately at the time I didn't have $30 million I could just use to train a single model. But no one was using that technology on a different modality, and the modality here are protein sequences. Who here could give me a good definition of what proteins do in the body? All right, no bio folks. So just at a very high level, proteins govern everything in disease, in health, in the human body. Viruses are proteins, bacteria are proteins, they're everything, right? And to a large language model, if you can say, here's a sequence of proteins, now predict me the next amino acid, the building blocks of proteins, it will do a just as phenomenal job as if you ask ChatGPT, like, oh, write me a poem about, flying saucers and my wife. And like, it will just generate that sequence. And what's incredible about doing that on proteins is that proteins govern everything in life, in biological life. And so what we did is we actually asked our very large model, the largest protein model LLM in the world, to generate one, and then we went into a wet lab and actually synthesized those proteins in actual biology, and they worked. They folded correctly, they had antibacterial properties, and what that means is that at some point in the next decade or so, we will be able to have control over the kinds of proteins that, again, govern everything in our body. And that will change all of medicine, cancer research, virus research. Right now we have a pretty good handle as humanity on bacterial infections and bacteria with antibiotics. We suck at dealing with viruses, HIV, all these different things, HPV, like there's so many viruses, COVID, that suck, and we have very little, like a very bad handle on it. And I think that will change massively with the same kind of underlying idea of just predict the next character sequence. But then, of course, you fine-tune it in the case of chat, with reinforcement learning and human feedback. But in these LMs for proteins, you also have specifically labeled sequences where you say, this is that kind of virus or bacteria, or this protein helps you synthesize or catalyze a certain reaction. You can split water to get H2 for new transportation methods and so on. There's so much potential. But since there's not that many bio folks here. I hope that inspired some people to look into bio stuff. But other than that, I guess I'm also really excited about physics, because I think physics is kind of stuck. Particle physics has been lame, but also not super CTO relevant. I do think, obviously, the last thing I have to say is search. But what is search? What is the job to be done when you're asking a search engine, what's the best backpack for a 2-day cross-country trip? Or what are the best skis for like powder mountain skiing? You usually end up actually wanting to buy it, right? And if you ask me like, how do I get to Hawaii? You probably want to book a trip to Hawaii. So I think the next sequence of things that these large sequence models can predict are not just words, not even just code, but sequences of actions that they can take for you. And then what's also very interesting, very nascent right now and a little bit overhyped, but there's a kernel of truth to the hype, is Auto-GPT-like models, where basically you have a model that can code, and you have another model that evaluates whether the outcome of that code made any sense. And then you let them go in a loop. And right now, most of those loops are just wasting API calls and cost a lot of money, and they don't do anything useful. But there's a huge amount of potential there to have self-refining AI models that can code in actual programming language, have access to an interpreter, run that code, then evaluate whether the output was what they would like to see, and if not, edit it and modify the code, and then go in a loop like that for a few minutes or hours, depending on how complex the task is, and then solve much, much more complex problems. I think that will happen in the next couple of years.
Super interesting. Do we have a couple of questions from the audience? I don't know, where's the lady with the mic? Oh, there. So, any questions? Just raise the hand.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Over there.
First one right there. Yeah.
Hey, Richard. Thank you for the talk. My question is, do you think search should be paid or ad paid for? And I mean, there's like Kagi, where you can pay for your own search. Do you think that's something people will do?
It's a great question. So yeah, I looked at Kagi for a while and really considered it also. Unfortunately, now looking at the stats, they're very, very small. They're like 2 orders of magnitude already smaller than U.com. And it is a very, very uphill battle when you have consumers that are used for the flagship product to be free for 20 years to then say, we're going to make it so much better, you're going to want to pay for it, trust us, and get them to pay. So I think the pure search engine, especially a search engine that just shows you lists of links as sort of the main way of interaction, is very tough to, it's a tough sell to make it paid. Now, I do think, and we're actually exploring and have shipped, like I mentioned, these apps, right? You can have bundles of apps and then say, hey, if you want your search engine to write really sophisticated code that may have also incorporated some of your company internal code or something, and you don't want to have ads, and you want to have a really large language model that maybe will do some of that iteration on code that that I just described in the future, and it will generate images for you with a pretty complex generative AI model for images, and have a few other features, I think you can bundle it, and that's kind of what we're evaluating and working on right now, and it looks promising that people are interested in that kind of thing. I think, yeah, just here's a list of blue links, but you better pay for it now. I think that won't work. I think we have some questions back there.
Hands raised.
2 of them.
Yeah.
Thank you. I liked your idea of integrating the code snippet stuff into the IDEs, because I think it solves some of the issues that we discussed here on Slack with copyright and so on. But we are serving as critical infrastructure source code as well. And for us, the biggest threat that we encounter is basically integrating third-party libraries. Because I think everyone here remembers Log4j, and everyone was busy. Are we using it? If so, in which version? And I'm thinking if AI generates all the code, would there be something in the future saying, hey, if you have this problem and it got generated before date X, then you have this issue? Because in these things, scalability. I mean, a lot of people are using now this code. Same with libraries. So scalability is an issue versus proprietary software. A software engineer thinks about it, does something. There might also be an error or security issue, but it's just this one guy. So how do you think the future will deal with AI-generated code and security issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not like super deep into security, but I've invested in a couple of companies in that space. There's some interesting stuff where some people say, look, the browser is now the new operating system. Let's just make the browser really safe. Then you can care less about everything else around it, there's some interesting security ideas. But I think AI will be really great at producing like front-end code much more easily because there's less security issues there often, though obviously like if it gets really fancy in JavaScript and so on, there are security issues there too. My hunch is you can use AI to also review code. You can say, hey, here are all the known security issues that we are aware of. Now go through that entire massive code base and see if you can find any of those issues we just listed. So I think in that sense, AI will be very helpful. I do think coders of the future will have to get better and better at code reviewing rather than code writing. Similarly, if you're a writer, you can have, and this is already a reality in translation. Translation, if you're getting paid per word rather than per hour, you will use an AI to get a raw translation, and then you will just fine-tune it. And make sure it sort of stylistically makes sense. But you never have to look up, oh, what's the translation of this particularly rare word? I don't know, and stuff like that. I think similarly, more and more coding will have a big piece of code written by an AI, but you still need to do a good code review of it. And you need to check for security flaws and so on. I think red teaming will also get much easier with AI. Like you can basically write very personalized, and the other side will use the same thing, but you'll very personalized, automated phishing emails. And you should, as a red team inside a company, train people to be like, even if they know the stuff you posted on TikTok the other day, they're still not your coworker. Don't share your phone number, password, or whatever, right? And so there's going to be a new level of education that's necessary. Just like Photoshop taught us to not trust any photo we see online, you'll have similar things with videos in the future. You can't trust videos anymore, and you have to educate people about that. So yeah, I think those are my first couple of thoughts. We could probably double-click more into it, but yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Counteracting AI attacks with AI, right? Basically. Okay. Yeah. Let's have a few more questions.
1, 2, 3.
How much time do we got? We have 10 more minutes. But sure, right? I think it's 5 more minutes. At least one other question. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, hi, Eugene. Thanks for the talk. I was listening to your answer regarding the marketing. Till now, there is a deal between Google and the publishers. So the publishers, they offer their content, and Google, they send the traffic to the publishers. The question is, when the AI will answer all the questions, how and what should the publishers exist anymore? I know that that it will disrupt everything, but anybody and everyone here needs the traffic for his company. Doesn't matter if he just publish any content, for example, sneakers or something like that. Apps is a solution. We can now offer or build any kind of apps, but how will you rate the quality or the truth from the results, for example?
Okay, so the truth is a different question than like, should publishers still exist? So I guess they're all, like in the online advertising world, publishers is pretty broadly defined, right? As anyone who produces content and wants to get people to come and pay for it and so on, or just like be there in order to click on ads later, right? And so I think the app model that I described for you.com has the clearest answer to that, which is your content is just right on that first page of the search engine, and then we monetize together on that page. So you can have your own ad next to your own content inside that first search engine. Or, in one level deeper, if the AI took a large chunk of information from your content, then it may also be more likely that it pulls in your ad, or if it thinks it has a better ad, just help give you fractional revenue of an ad that is shown next to your content. So I think that is the cleanest answer that you.com would provide. Now, I don't know, the rest of the world, right, they might not do that. And so I do hope, and this is a big part of why I started you.com, to build a more equitable, fair thing. Now, of course, there's also trouble because we might do not so great things when we make almost no revenue. We're actually mostly pre-revenue. We're currently working on private advertisements to get those similar to DuckDuckGo up and running. And so we may already be taking some content, but since we make no revenue, we can't share revenue. And so there's maybe a short moment where it's a bit of a chicken-egg problem. But I think as we scale and turn on monetization and then have private ads and things like that, and then actually get content providers to really partner with us, then I think it'll make more sense. And right now, and I guess there's also the obvious answer of subscription models, right? I think some people continue to offer interesting enough content that people will pay for it. The information is kind of popular in the Bay Area. They often break certain news before anyone else does, and people pay for subscription. And then the idea there is in the search engine, you can also just directly get people to subscribe to your newsletter after they see some preview of your content.
Interesting. But how would you build an auction-like model if you actually want to build an auction like Google, which made them trillions and billions, in that model? So if it's more an affiliate business, like a commission-based one, where the auction doesn't really work unless you get, or would you build some sort of auction model inside, or would you try to be as accurate, or you see where my question leads?
I can, but I don't really want to answer it because it's okay. Too far in the future. I can only give away so much about our roadmap. So sorry, we had 2 other questions.
Over there? Yeah.
All right there.
Richard, thank you. There's also a huge debate going on in terms of bias of large language models. And I'm interested in what's your view about that, especially in terms of how is local or regional sovereignty or cultural sovereignty being handled, and especially what's your answer as a search provider to that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the bias is a general issue that's plaguing any statistical models and AI models that are based on historic data, right? So and in some cases, fortunately, it's illegal and you have to get rid of the bias. So if you realize that as a credit-giving organization, your historic training data doesn't have as many women in the positive set of people who have gotten the credit, and it picks that bias up and then is less likely to give a woman with a great business idea a credit, then that's illegal, fortunately, right? It's gender-based discrimination. And likewise, AI needs to work on that. And because it is illegal, there have been actually models that work on that, and even startups that help you with bias for specific AI problems. And then concretely...
Let me refine my question. That's clear, yeah. But I mean especially cultural sovereignty problems in terms of maybe the truth in the US is a different truth than the one in Europe. How do you handle that?
Right. So I think large language models have a lot of interesting things, right? They pick up a lot of data, and I think zooming out for a second, AI is so fascinating because it kind of puts a mirror in front of us and says, this is who you are based on your actual actions, the actual data that you produce as a society, as culture, as the internet, right? And it turns out, the internet has some pretty terrible things on it, right? Some of it's fortunately legal, but a lot of stuff on Reddit isn't quite illegal. It's just kind of a dick move, pardon my French. And so you basically want to filter some of that, and then what I think is actually interesting is to give people control over some of their information sources. Maybe you say, I want to see more Twitter-like results. And you can set those preferences already in u.com because we feel like that's an important aspect. What we don't yet do enough of is to actually realize this is a potentially political or politically charged subject, and then say when there are multiple, I would say, reasonable viewpoints on that subject, to get the AI model to actually showcase that and say, oh, you're talking about, there's this famous sort of spectrum that not many people are aware of litigation versus legislation. In Europe, people want to legislate and avoid certain problems that consumers may have before they exist. And so they try to regulate a technology that isn't even widely spread yet. Whereas in the US, it's litigation. You just let people do a lot of stuff. And if someone actually gets hurt or doesn't like it, they sue you after. And after the lawsuit, you basically write the law based on that. And while that has some of its problems, it also allows the US in many sort of non-critical areas, obviously the US also doesn't let you sell snake oil and like medical devices that don't work and let cars drive on the road with no supervision and so on. But for a lot of other areas, you kind of can experiment until someone actually gets hurt or so there's like some issue, and then you get sued and then you have to deal with that. And so, but there's more innovation that way. And so if you ask a question like that to a large language model, it ideally in the future will give you different viewpoints on that same subject. And there are lots of other ones that are even more politically charged, like gun control and birth control and like other things. Some of them shouldn't be politically charged, but are. And there's a subtle balance. And at some point, you're going to hit points that there is no right answer anymore, right? It is just a largely opinion-based thing. And then you want to be very careful about how fringe of an opinion you want to also mention, right? You don't want to go too far out there because the political spectrum, I think, is getting pulled further and further into the fringes, and it's better to stick to somewhat different viewpoints, but maybe not too crazy.
Cool. Do we have time for another question, or
I think if you have like one last question, that's okay. I'm by the way taking drink orders, so if any one of you wants a drink, even if it's water, it's fine. But we have space for one more question, and I guess everyone is very hungry, so we have to continue then.
All right, I'll be quick. So over here. But so you mentioned the thing, and I think we're all aware of, like, if you're a coder or whatnot, and they're using these tools, you will be 1,000 times more effective than the person that doesn't. They'll lose their job. The one that
I don't know about 1,000 yet, but at least
yeah. For me, it works really well. But
nice.
I consider myself to be the worst programmer in the team. But the thing that I do kind of wonder, and even in other contexts, I've spoken with this about like partners BCG and whatnot. And part of the concern is, let's say you bring in junior people. That, 3 years from now, the tools are established and whatnot, and it's proven. If you're a craftsman and you use this stuff, you become remarkably better because you have that intuition already built up of like, oh, that's crap, or this will work, or whatnot. And I'd be interested to see or hear your thoughts on what do you actually do with, let's say, the next generation, only because part of the learning process, at least to me, is the struggle with the material. And if you take away the struggle with the material, does that then decrease the quality of, let's say, junior talent coming out of schools or whatnot? Because they don't have to do that anymore. They can just put it in, they get a code snippet or a storytelling prompt, whatever it is, and they lose that struggle. So I'd be curious to see what you think about that.
It's a great question. I think education has to update with generative AI having improved so much. It's kind of like a funny situation when your parents use a tool in their work every day, yet your kids are not allowed to use it in school. It's just, there's some fundamental mismatch there, right? It doesn't make sense. At the same time, you still need to be able to have kids that can communicate clearly some novel thoughts that are only in their heads, and there's no data about them outside. They need to be able to write an essay and stuff like that. I think the easy answer for testing is that just like when you test kids for simple mental arithmetic that a calculator could do, is you don't take-home finals, right? Which in Germany doesn't do anyway, but a lot of US schools give you take-home finals. And they're just like, say, don't cheat, please. And so if you want the kid to write an essay without any technology help, just have it sit in class on a pencil and paper and pen and paper, or an internet, like a computer that's not connected to the internet, and then have them write that essay. So I think that will still continue to be right. But I do think there are some changes, and the older you get, the more you're like, but back in my day, I could still use a map and find my way around. And it's like, well, if you grow up and you always have Google Maps with you, it's a skill that is just not as important anymore to occupy parts of your brain. And I don't think kids are getting a lot dumber these days, but they will have to update. And so concretely, I think judging output at a high level will become more and more important. And the people who can judge the output very quickly will advance. And so in 3 or 5 years from now, when a lot of the simple stuff gets more and more automated, I think it'll be great. I think that means that you can learn and spend a lot more time on architecture decisions. You can study computer science now, and you don't have to know assembler and assembly code. You don't have to know about pointers that much anymore. Obviously, if you then really, if that's your main thing, you want to write some CUDA kernels and stuff, then you have to like double click into it. But you can be a very productive programmer without knowing anything about actual assembler code. And so I think that is very exciting, and that makes people more productive. These tools will continue to do that, and you can go higher and higher level and build an entire app without having to understand a lot of the abstraction layers. And that's what computer science has done so well of, right? We built abstraction layers to make people more and more productive at higher and higher levels. And so my hunch is knowing which tools to use, making good architectural decisions, and then basically have fewer and fewer people who need to be able to go very deep into that stack. They'll still need to exist. Someone still needs to implement stuff on a new GPU that is coming out, but there'll just be fewer of them. And if you have more questions, I can hang out for another like half hour or so after. So
that's
happy
awesome.
to chat later. Yeah.
Richard Socher, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful.
Great questions, great crowd.
Thank you so much for spending the time with us.